Join me as I dive deep into the dark and twisted true crime story of Marilyn and Dennis Depue, and see if I can uncover the chilling details that most people don't know. The Dennis Depue case is a true crime story that will chill you to the bone, a haunting reminder that darkness can lurk behind even the most picturesque of lives. At the center of this twisted tale are Marilyn and Dennis Depue, a seemingly ordinary husband and wife whose outward appearance is the epitome of suburban perfection. They were the kind of couple that no one ever suspected could harbor such deep dysfunction. From the outside, everything appeared flawless, their home well kept, their children bright and happy, their lives intertwined in a way that suggested stability and contentment. But behind the closed doors of their meticulously maintained facade, a sinister game of manipulation and control was slowly unfolding. What seemed like a loving marriage was, in reality, a power struggle of cat and mouse, one that would lead to tragedy. As is often the case in true crime, the cracks beneath the surface are invisible to the casual observer until it is too late. For Marilyn and Dennis Depue, the unraveling of their relationship would not only end in death, but would also leave a trail of psychological terror that no one saw coming. In the spring of 1993, Marilyn Depue vanished without a trace, disappearing as if swallowed by the earth itself. The eerie silence surrounding her disappearance was broken only by a cryptic note, hastily scrawled, and a handful of confusing clues that left investigators scrambling to piece together what had happened. As days turned into weeks, Marilyn's absence grew more ominous, and it became increasingly clear that her disappearance was no random event. Investigators soon found themselves on a wild goose chase, following dead-end leads and tantalizing yet elusive clues. At the center of the mystery was one undeniable fact. The person with the most motive and opportunity to harm Marilyn was her husband, Dennis Depue. While on the surface he played the part of a concerned husband, those close to the investigation began to suspect that Dennis was not just a heartbroken spouse, he was the prime suspect. What made the case even more chilling was that Dennis appeared to enjoy toying with the police. It was as if he relished the challenge, playing a twisted game of cat and mouse, always staying one step ahead of the investigation, leaving just enough evidence to intrigue, but never enough to convict. The case had all the hallmarks of a classic whodunit, but this was no fictional mystery. This was real, and the stakes were life or death. As the investigation into Marilyn Depue's disappearance progressed, the growing unease among detectives was palpable. What had initially appeared to be a straightforward missing persons case soon morphed into something far more sinister. At first, there was little reason to believe Dennis had anything to do with his wife's vanishing. His demeanor was calm, collected, and even helpful in the early days. He spoke to police without hesitation, offering plausible explanations for Marilyn's absence and maintaining a steady facade of concern for her well-being. But as detectives continued to delve deeper into the couple's history, an unsettling picture began to emerge. Small inconsistencies in Dennis's stories started to surface. Innocuous at first, but when pieced together, they pointed to something far more calculated. The more they dug, the more it became clear that Dennis was hiding something. But what? And more importantly, why? The deeper the investigation went, the more detectives began to realize that Dennis Depue was not just hiding the truth, he was manipulating the investigation itself. Dennis seemed to be playing an elaborate game with law enforcement, a psychological chess match in which he remained one step ahead at every turn. He was a master of deception, weaving a complex web of lies and half-truths designed to keep the police off balance. Every time they thought they were closing in on a lead, Dennis would slip away, offering just enough information to point them in the wrong direction. It was a game of smoke and mirrors, with Dennis always keeping the real story just out of reach. His ability to misdirect and confuse was so adept that detectives found themselves questioning even their most basic assumptions about the case. What had once seemed like straightforward evidence was suddenly thrown into doubt, as Dennis expertly manipulated the situation to keep them guessing. The investigation soon became a frustrating labyrinth, filled with endless twists and turns that seemed to lead nowhere. Each day brought a new puzzle, a fresh lead that initially appeared promising, but would quickly fizzle out into another dead end, leaving detectives disheartened and more confused than before. It was a relentless game of cat and mouse, with the police chasing after shadows and illusions. At times, it felt as though Dennis had orchestrated the perfect crime, leaving behind just enough breadcrumbs to keep them on his trail, but never enough to truly implicate him. His every move seemed calculated, as if he were toying with the authorities, offering them fleeting glimpses of hope, only to pull the rug out from under them just as they thought they were closing in. With each passing week, it became clear that Dennis was no ordinary man caught up in the wake of a tragedy. He was cunning, methodical, and always one step ahead. It was as if he were orchestrating the entire investigation, like a puppet master pulling the strings from behind the scenes, watching as the detectives scrambled to piece together the puzzle he had so carefully constructed. Every time they thought they were close to unraveling the mystery, the trail would go cold once again, leaving them with more questions than answers. Suspicions would mount, only to be dashed by the lack of concrete evidence. The pressure on the investigative team was immense, with the case growing colder by the day. The harder they pushed, the more elusive the truth became, slipping through their fingers like sand. The psychological toll on the detectives was undeniable. They began to second-guess their instincts, wonder if they were missing something crucial, or if Dennis was simply that good at covering his tracks. Each new failure left a bitter taste, a nagging feeling that they were being outwitted at every turn. The more they tried to catch him, the further away he seemed, as if the truth was a mirage that moved just beyond their grasp. What started as a search for justice had turned into a battle of wills, with Dennis in control of the entire game. Marilyn and Dennis Depue's love story began like so many others, filled with the innocence and optimism that accompanies the early days of youth. They were high school sweethearts, bound together by the thrill of young love and the excitement of a future that seemed full of endless possibilities. Theirs appeared to be the quintessential American romance. Two young people destined to spend their lives together, building a future, raising a family, and living the suburban dream. From the outside, their relationship was picture perfect. They got married soon after high school, settling into their roles as husband and wife with ease, or so it seemed. Dennis was a driven and ambitious man, committed to providing for his family and creating a facade of success that others would admire. Marilyn, in contrast, embraced her role as the quintessential wife and mother, caring for their children and managing their home with dedication. Their life together appeared idyllic to those on the outside looking in. The Depues had a beautiful house in a comfortable neighborhood, a stable family, and the outward appearance of a couple living out the American dream. Friends and neighbors saw a couple who seemed to have it all, a life many could only hope for. Their home was well maintained, their children were polite and well-behaved, and Dennis's career was on track. But like many things that glitter on the surface, the shine of their marriage masked something much darker beneath. The smiles at family gatherings, the courteous waves to neighbors, and the polite exchanges in public were nothing more than a thin veneer covering deep, festering cracks. Beneath this polished exterior, their relationship was far from the ideal image they projected. In reality, their marriage was a ticking time bomb, a powder keg waiting for the inevitable spark to ignite the explosion. While Marilyn appeared to be the confident, happy woman everyone thought she was, in truth, deeply unhappy. Behind the closed doors of their seemingly perfect home, Marilyn was a wife who lived in fear, trapped in a marriage that had slowly turned toxic. Over the years, Dennis's true nature had begun to surface. The charming, attentive husband he appeared to be in public was nothing more than a facade. In private, Dennis was controlling, demanding, and prone to unpredictable outbursts. His temper was quick to ignite, often flaring up without warning, leaving Marilyn on edge, constantly trying to anticipate what might set him off next. Living in constant fear of Dennis's unpredictable anger, Marilyn had gradually become a shadow of herself, increasingly submissive in an attempt to avoid his wrath. She walked on eggshells, never knowing what small mistake might provoke him. What once may have seemed like a marriage built on love had now become a battleground, where she tiptoed around to maintain a fragile peace. Meanwhile, Dennis seemed to relish this dynamic. His need for control over Marilyn wasn't just emotional, it was psychological. He manipulated her fears and insecurities with calculated precision, ensuring that she remained dependent on him, too frightened to resist or leave. The balance of power in their marriage had long since shifted, with Dennis ruling over their household like a tyrant, feeding off the control he held over her life and emotions. Marilyn's world had become one of silent desperation, hidden behind the mask of the perfect wife in the perfect marriage, while Dennis thrived in his role as the puppet master, pulling the strings from behind the scenes. In the months leading up to Marilyn's disappearance, their marriage had reached a breaking point. The tension between them was palpable, and their arguments grew more frequent and intense. Friends and family members began to notice the strain in their relationship, although many dismissed it as the usual ups and downs of married life. But for Marilyn, it was much more than that. She confided in a few close friends about her fears, revealing that Dennis's temper was becoming more unpredictable and that she felt trapped in a marriage that had long since lost its love. Marilyn hinted at leaving Dennis, but the fear of his reaction held her back. She was caught between the desire to escape and the terror of what he might do if she tried. Yet, despite the warning signs, her growing unhappiness, the constant arguments, and her increasing isolation, no one could have predicted the shocking turn of events that was about to unfold. The quiet, slow-burning tension in their marriage was about to reach its violent climax, setting off a chain of events that would end in tragedy and leave a trail of devastation in its wake. As the investigation into Marilyn Depue's disappearance pressed forward, detectives began to uncover a series of cryptic notes and coded messages that added a bizarre twist to the case. The discovery of these strange communications only deepened the mystery surrounding Marilyn's fate and raised more questions than answers. At first glance, the notes seemed to offer clues to her whereabouts, but as investigators delved deeper, it became clear that the messages were far from straightforward. Some were found at Marilyn's home, while others mysteriously appeared at various locations associated with the Depue family. What initially appeared to be a trail of breadcrumbs left to help solve the case quickly morphed into a labyrinth of confusion and false leads. The content of the notes was both puzzling and unsettling. Some contained vague references to Marilyn's disappearance, while others hinted at deeper, more sinister motives lurking beneath the surface. Scattered among the seemingly meaningless symbols and phrases were cryptic references to power, control, and domination, concepts that investigators soon realized aligned disturbingly well with Dennis Depue's controlling personality. At first, these notes seemed like an attempt to provide answers, as if Dennis wanted to guide the investigation toward a conclusion. But detectives began to suspect there was a much more twisted reason behind them. The entire ordeal felt like a carefully orchestrated game, a calculated ruse designed to keep law enforcement off balance. Dennis, they soon realized, was toying with them, feeding them just enough information to keep them searching, while constantly misdirecting their efforts. Dennis's deception was not only cunning, but masterful. Each note or code seemed to implicate someone else, shifting suspicion away from him and keeping detectives chasing false leads. It was as though he was daring them to catch him, relishing the role of puppet master, pulling the strings of an increasingly frustrated police force. His arrogance was palpable in every misstep the detectives made, and his ability to evade capture for as long as he did only added to his sense of superiority. Yet, for all his cleverness, Dennis made one fatal mistake. He underestimated the perseverance and dedication of the investigators. While the cryptic notes and codes initially threw them off, they never stopped digging and never stopped analyzing the details. The detectives began to see a pattern, and slowly but surely they pieced together the real story hidden beneath the smokescreen Dennis had so carefully crafted. The dramatic turning point in the case came when one of the lead investigators made a breakthrough in decoding the messages. After weeks of painstaking work, they finally cracked the code, and what they uncovered was nothing short of shocking. Hidden within the convoluted language and bizarre symbols was a confession, one that Dennis likely never intended for them to find. The coded confession detailed aspects of Marilyn's disappearance that only the person responsible could know, and it confirmed the growing suspicions that Dennis was the mastermind behind her vanishing. With the confession in hand, the once fragmented pieces of the puzzle began to fit together. The cryptic notes had been nothing more than a smokescreen, a clever attempt to mislead investigators and hide Dennis's guilt. But in the end, it was Dennis's ego that proved to be his undoing. His need to control the narrative, to outsmart the police at every turn, led him to leave behind just enough evidence to unravel his carefully constructed lies. Once the code was cracked, the full weight of the evidence against him came crashing down. Investigators now had not only the coded confession, but also a timeline of events and witness statements that pointed directly to Dennis as the prime suspect. The evidence was overwhelming, and with each passing day, Dennis's carefully constructed facade crumbled under the pressure. He had played a clever game, but in the end, it was his arrogance that sealed his fate, and the investigation finally began to close in on the man responsible for Marilyn's disappearance. The public's reaction was one of shock and disbelief. How could this seemingly ordinary husband and father be capable of such heinous crimes? As the case against Dennis mounted, the community was left reeling, trying to make sense of the twisted tale of deceit and betrayal. In the end, justice was served, but the impact of the Depue case was far-reaching. It was a stark reminder that even the most ordinary-looking families can be hiding dark secrets, and that the true face of evil can be lurking in the most unexpected places. So, what do you think about the Depue case? Do you think justice was served, or do you think there's more to the story? Did you enjoy tonight's episode? Let us know your theories and questions on our social media channels. Your feedback fuels our investigations. Join us next time as we continue our journey into the heart of darkness. This is Midnight Society, the Bradford Chronicles,